The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jostling the cabin. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze as she blinked sleepily. Her cheeks turned crimson as she realized where she was, snuggled against the chest of a stranger, her hand clasped in his. A poor divorced mom accidentally sleeps on a stranger's shoulder on a flight, unaware he's a billionaire connected to her dying mother's wish. When her ex-husband insults her, the powerful stranger defends her, revealing a love story she never saw coming. But we start the video. Let us know where you're watching this video, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, Story Storer, and please share your thoughts about this story in comment section. Leena's heart broke as she hugged her 3-year-old son. "Mommy will be back soon," she whispered, fighting tears. His tiny arms clung to her, eyes pleading. Her ex-husband leaned against the door, smirking. "Running away again, Leena?" She ignored him, focusing on her son. She had no choice. Her mother was critically ill in London, and leaving him with his father was her only option. "I love you," she choked out, pulling away. His tears mirrored her own. She turned, walking away without looking back, her heart shattering with every step. She had to be strong. Exhausted, Leena sank into her economy seat, eyes heavy. She hadn't slept in days, juggling 2 jobs and booking a last-minute flight. Beside her sat a tall man in a tailored suit, focused on his laptop, his jawline sharp and serious. The plane took off, vibrations soothing her into sleep. Her body leaned sideways, head resting on something firm and warm. Too tired to notice, she had fallen asleep on the stranger's shoulder. He stiffened, his eyes widening as he glanced down at her. Her delicate features were so close, her breath soft and even against his neck. Her lips were mere inches from his jaw, her eyelashes fluttering as she dreamed. His heart thudded in his chest, his pulse quickening. He tried to shift, but her head slid lower, her face pressing against his broad chest, her cheek nuzzling into the fabric of his shirt. His breath hitched, his muscles tensing as warmth spread through him. She looked so vulnerable, so peaceful. Her hand slipped from her lap, fingers brushing his. Without thinking, he caught her hand, his larger palm enveloping hers. Her fingers curled around his, her grip gentle and trusting. His chest tightened, his heartbeat racing as he stared at their intertwined hands. He should have woken her up, should have pulled away. But instead, he stayed still, his arm curling around her shoulder protectively, his thumb unconsciously stroking her fingers. For reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to keep her safe, to shelter her from whatever was haunting her dreams. Someone nearby let out a soft gasp, followed by the click of a camera. A woman whispered excitedly to her friend, "Look at that couple. They're adorable." The man's eyes flicked to the source of the voice, his sharp gaze landing on a pair of women grinning at their phones. One of them was typing rapidly, her fingers dancing across the screen. "#couple goals," she giggled. "This is definitely going viral." His jaw tightened, a mixture of annoyance and something else. He should have been angry at the invasion of privacy. But instead, his eyes returned to the woman sleeping soundly against his chest, her hand still clutching his. He felt his lips curve into a soft smile. She shifted in her sleep, her face nestling closer to his heart. His pulse quickened, his chest tightening as he realized just how close her lips were to his skin. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jostling the cabin. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze as she blinked sleepily. Her cheeks turned crimson as she realized where she was, snuggled against the chest of a stranger, her hand clasped in his. She jerked upright, her face burning with embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." He released her hand gently, his expression calm and reassuring. "It's okay, you were tired." Her eyes widened, mortification flooding her features. I shouldn't have, I didn't realize." His deep, soothing voice cut through her flustered apologies. "Really, it's fine. You looked like you needed the rest." His gaze softened, his eyes warm and kind. I didn't mind. Leena's heart skipped a beat. There was something about his voice, his presence, that made her feel safe. She swallowed, her embarrassment fading into gratitude. "Thank you." He offered her a gentle smile, his demeanor calm and composed. "You're welcome." A flight attendant approached, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Mr. Knight, I've brought your special meal. Would you like it served now?" Leena's eyes widened. "Mr. Knight? As in Alexander Knight, the billionaire CEO?" Alexander's eyes flicked to Leena, his expression softening. "Please bring one for her as well. I believe she could use a good meal." The flight attendant's jaw dropped. "Oh, of course, Mr. Knight, right away." Leena's face turned crimson. You don't have to do that. I'm fine." Alexander's gaze was unwavering. "I insist. Consider it my apology for being a less than adequate pillow." A laugh bubbled out of her, surprising them both. She quickly covered her mouth, her eyes shining with embarrassment. Thank you. That's very kind of you." He shrugged, his expression playful. "Well, I couldn't let you go hungry after you graciously drooled on my shoulder." Leena's face turned beet red, her laughter turning into a mortified gasp. "Oh, no, I did not. Did I?" Alexander chuckled, his deep voice warm and inviting. "Just a little. But don't worry, I won't tell anyone." Leena covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with laughter. For the first time in days, she felt light, her worries momentarily forgotten. As they shared a meal, conversation flowed easily. Alexander was charming and attentive, his calm demeanor putting her at ease. He asked about her journey, her reasons for traveling, but never pried too deeply. Before she knew it, the plane was descending, the flight coming to an end. Leena felt a pang of disappointment as she realized she'd never see him again. As they disembarked, Alexander looked at her, his eyes lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "Take care of yourself, Leena." Her heart skipped. How do you know my name?" His lips curved into a mysterious smile. "You talk in your sleep." Her face turned scarlet, her mouth opening and closing in shock. But before she could form a response, he was gone, his tall figure disappearing into the crowd. Leena stood there, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. Who was Alexander Knight? And why did she feel like their story was only just beginning? Leena stood frozen at the doorway, her heart racing as she took in the scene before her. There, by her mother's bedside, sat the handsome stranger from the flight. His shoulders were broad, his posture gentle as he held her mother's frail hand, his face softened with concern. His head turned, and his piercing blue eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise dancing across his face before his lips curled into a tender smile. Leena's heart skipped a beat, memories of the flight flooding back, his warm shoulder, his protective embrace, his soft voice asking if she was okay. What are you doing here?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with disbelief and confusion. Before he could answer, her mother's raspy voice broke the silence. "Leena, he's Alexander Knight, Julia's son." The room spun. Julia's son? Her mother's best friend who had passed away years ago? The pieces began to click into place. Her mother had always spoken about Julia's son, the boy she adored, who grew into the man who now sat before her. Her mother's eyes sparkled with tears as she continued, I always hoped you two would find each other. Julia and I made a promise. If anything happened to us, we wanted our children to have each other." She took a shaky breath, her frail fingers tightening around Alexander's hand. "Leena, marry him. He's the one who can protect you. And my grandson." Leena's heart pounded, her cheeks flushing as she stole a glance at Alexander. Was this real? Could this be happening? She barely knew him, yet her heart raced whenever she was near him. She remembered the warmth she felt as she slept on his shoulder, the way he made her feel safe, cherished. Alexander stood up, his tall frame towering over her, yet his eyes were soft, his voice gentle. "I know this is sudden, but I've admired you from afar for a long time, Leena. When I saw your photo, I knew I had to meet you. And on that flight, I knew I could never let you go." Her heart fluttered, her breath catching as he took a step closer, his gaze locking with hers. "Marry me, Leena. Let me protect you. Let me be the man you deserve." Tears pricked at her eyes. Was this really happening? Could she dare to dream of happiness after all the pain she endured? Her lips parted, words forming in her mind. The door burst open with a loud crash. Leena's heart dropped as she saw him, her ex-husband, eyes blazing with fury, her son in his arms. He strode in, his voice dripping with contempt. "So, this is where you've been? Throwing yourself at rich men? I always knew you were shameless." The air grew heavy, tension crackling as her son's innocent eyes looked at her in confusion. Leena's heart shattered, tears streaming down her face. Her ex-husband's cruel words cut deep, reopening wounds she thought had healed. But before she could respond, Alexander's voice sliced through the room, cold and commanding. "Leave, now." Her ex-husband's face twisted in anger. "Who do you think you are?" Alexander's eyes darkened, his jaw clenched. "I'm the man who's about to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." Everyone turned to him. Leena's ex-husband's jaw dropped in recognition. You're Alexander Knight." The name rippled through the onlookers, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and prestige. The CEO of Knight Enterprises, standing here in the hospital corridor defending Leena. Alexander's eyes were cold, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, and if you dare insult Leena again, you'll regret it." Leena's ex-husband faltered, his anger replaced by fear. But Leena was more stunned by the look in Alexander's eyes, a look that spoke of protection, loyalty, and something more. How had she ended up here, defended by one of the most powerful men in the city? Leena's ex-husband, Michael, stormed into the hospital corridor furious. "You're pathetic, Leena. Leaving our son while you're off in London, falling asleep on some stranger's shoulder." His words were sharp, but before she could respond, Alexander Knight, a tall, imposing figure, stepped in front of her. His icy tone silenced Michael. "That's enough." Recognizing Alexander, Michael stammered, You're Alexander Knight? The CEO of Knight Enterprises? What are you doing here?" The onlookers in the hospital corridor whispered in shock. The richest man in the city, standing up for her? The man who had the power to change her life, and her ex-husband's. It was surreal. But Leena's ex-husband's fear didn't last long before his temper flared once again. "You've got some nerve," he sneered, trying to salvage his pride. "What? You're defending her now? She's nothing but a woman who—" "Shut your mouth," Alexander interrupted, his tone colder than ice. He took out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "You want to insult her again? Fine. Let's see how much longer you keep your precious job." Leena's breath caught in her throat as she watched Alexander's face harden with fury. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't just some billionaire with words. He was someone who could erase lives without a second thought. "I'm calling my assistant now," Alexander continued, his voice smooth but laced with a dangerous edge. "Bankrupt him. Take everything. The man who cheats, lies, and calls his ex-wife characterless deserves nothing." Leena's ex-husband's expression shifted from defiance to panic, his eyes widening as the realization hit him. "What? No, you can't." His voice faltered, desperation creeping in. "Please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Just, please don't ruin me." Alexander calmly pressed a button on his phone, not even looking at her ex-husband. "I've already sent everything to the bank. The proof of your infidelity, the records of your financial dealings, it's all there." Her ex-husband's face drained of color, his eyes darting around, his mouth working as if he were choking on his own words. "Leena, please, please, you have to help me. I'm sorry. I know I've made mistakes. I'll change. Just, please, don't let him destroy me." Leena's chest tightened as she watched her ex-husband squirm before her, the man who had torn apart their family, who had betrayed her trust again and again, now begging at her feet. She looked at him, her eyes hardening with years of unspoken pain. Every moment with him had been a reminder of why she never wanted to go back to that life. "Save yourself," Leena said coldly, her voice steely. "You didn't care when you left me with nothing. You didn't care when you cheated and lied, so don't expect me to care now. I've spent too many years forgiving you, too many years swallowing my pride. But this time, I'm done." Her ex-husband's eyes widened in disbelief as the full weight of her words crashed down on him. For the first time in a long time, he looked small, powerless. He opened his mouth to say something more, but nothing came out. Alexander's expression softened as he turned his gaze to Leena, his presence still protective, but not imposing. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, his voice gentle in a way that made her chest ache. "You've carried this burden long enough. You deserve peace." Leena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I've already done more than I should have." Her ex-husband's pathetic attempts at begging were drowned out by the swift click of Alexander's phone. The deed was done. Her ex-husband's empire, the small world he'd built through manipulation, was crumbling. He was finished. "Goodbye, Michael," Leena said, her voice steady, not even a flicker of regret in her heart. "This is the last time you'll see me." Her ex-husband stared at her, fear and anger battling in his eyes, but the fire in his gaze had died. With one last defeated glance, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, the weight of his fall heavy in the air. The sterile hospital hallway grew quieter as Leena and Alexander approached the elevator, the air thick with unspoken words. As they waited, Alexander broke the silence. "Leena, there's something I need to tell you." He spoke of his mother's letters, a promise she had made him before she passed. "She asked me to marry you," Alexander revealed. Leena's heart raced. "Marry me," she whispered, stunned. "Why?" Alexander's gaze softened. "She believed our lives were connected long before we knew each other. She wanted me to find you, to never let you be alone." Leena struggled to absorb his words. "But we barely know each other." "I've loved you since the moment I saw you," Alexander said, his voice earnest. "It wasn't just about fulfilling my mother's wish. I've loved you even before I knew your name." Her breath caught in her throat as he presented her with a diamond ring. "Will you marry me? Not because of my mother's wish, but because I want you in my life." Overwhelmed, Leena whispered, "Yes." As the elevator doors closed, Alexander's voice was filled with warmth. "I'll spend my life making sure you never regret saying yes." Leena smiled, feeling like she had finally found where she truly belonged. This was destiny.